What I want to do here is three things tonight in my talk. Before I get to those three things, let me just make a remark about what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to patronize you by telling you how bad the situation is. Probably most of you kind of know, or you wouldn't be here. If you saw The Guardian this week, you'll have gathered a lot about how really, really bad it is. A load of scientists coming out and saying things like, what the fuck do we have to do to wake people up and let them understand fully how bad it is? And, you know, they use the word fuck, what maybe that's them, and all sorts of other words. And the former UN Special Rapporteur this week saying, it's like there's something wrong with people's brains, that they're not understanding how dire the situation is. So I won't patronize you and waste time by talking more about that. I will just say one tiny thing, which is that it is worth being aware that what you're hearing now in, say, these Guardian stories this week, scientists being very frank about how bad the situation is still really kind of the tip of the iceberg. I am fortunate enough to sometimes have private conversations with scientists, private scientists, ecologists, including my old university. And when they speak in private, they invariably say it even more strikingly and stridently than they do in public. Why? Because scientists are by nature cautious, conservative people. They don't like to say anything in public that they can't prove and support through their academic work. And that's why you should always assume that what scientists say about how bad the situation is not actually how bad it is. It is a minimum bottom line estimate, and it's almost certainly worse than that. They're not being alarmist, they're being the opposite, almost always. And I also have the good fortune to speak with other kinds of folks who we should think of in the ballpark here. I mean, climate scientists know a lot about the climate, ecologists know a lot about ecology. They don't necessarily know a lot about how systems work, including human systems. They don't necessarily know a lot about how politics works. So there are other kinds of people we should listen to as well. People like insurers, civil servants, even political so-called leaders, diplomats, systems thinkers of all kinds, people who are aware of the kind of risks that we're running. So, for example, I get to speak in private to civil servants who, of course, don't get to speak in public at all, pretty much. And now you've got an increasing number of civil servants in this country who are deeply concerned about the situation and about the risk of societal collapse that we are heading towards. So, as I say, I'm not going to speak about how bad the situation is, but just bear those facts in mind if you are ever tempted to think, yeah, but it doesn't kind of seem that bad and nothing's really collapsed yet. In any way, we're a very advanced economy and there's lots of sensible people and so on and so forth. No. The people who understand are scared, angry, and they're not even telling you yet quite how bad they think it is, because they're being, in various ways, cautious. So that's the background. That's the backdrop to the three things I want to do this evening. Against that tiny backdrop, the first thing I want to do is tell you very briefly about the Climate Majority Project. Very briefly, because if you want to know more about it, you can read our website, and I urge you to do so, and sign up there for updates. I'll also be passing around later a sign-up sheet where you can physically write your email address and get those updates. So do go on our website, climatemajorityproject.com. Or you can have a read if you want to dive a little bit deeper. I see a gentleman there has got it already, of the Climate Majority Project book, which is available in all good bookshops, but also online, for example, via our website. And not very expensive, and tell you all about it. Or you can watch one of my talks, or one of my colleagues' talks, where I go into detail about the Climate Majority Project. I'm just going to tell you very briefly about the basics of the Climate Majority Project before I go on to do two things in a little bit more detail. So the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the title of the talk. What do I mean when I say you are the climate majority? And the third thing, and final thing that I'll do before we break is I'll tell you something about the subtitle of the talk. What do I mean when I talk about strategic adaptation. What's all that about? What's the significance of it? Okay. So firstly, very briefly, the Climate Majority Project. So, as Steve says, like a number of other people, I was in Extinction Rebellion, and we achieved something quite wonderful in 2019. We forced a national conversation, an uncomfortable national conversation, which changed climate consciousness seemingly forever, or at least for quite a while. And that was great. But what a lot of us started to realize in late 2019 and 2020 was that Extinction Rebellion had gone into a bit of a kind of glass ceiling or something. Wasn't getting cut through anymore, wasn't growing anymore, had started to make some serious strategic errors, and that something else was needed. What was that something else going to be? Well, some people thought what you needed to do was get even more radical and even more in people's faces. But what a lot of us thought we needed to do was the opposite of that, was to, now that the conversation had been shifted, and a lot of people were more ready to think about the climate seriously than they had been before, was to start to actually mainstream the possibility of taking action on this. Because after all, and this is really the most important reason why I didn't want to spend a lot of time at the start of this evening telling you about how bad everything is. The most important thing, once you've got a picture of how bad everything is to do something about it. And what happened in 2019 was Extinction Rebellion raised the alarm brilliantly, along with Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough. And what needed to happen after that was that people acted on that alarm being raised, right? So what a lot of us started to think is, don't we need some way of mainstreaming climate action, of making it possible for ordinary citizens, most of whom will want to stay within the law most of the time, people who don't necessarily, for example, think of themselves as even potentially, let alone actually, being scary protester type people, as so many of the public see activists. We needed to find a way of bringing people together and getting them to understand that we need everyone, that this is not something that can be outsourced to the scientists or to technologists or to our leaders or to businesses. If you think that any of those groups are going to solve this by themselves, well, they haven't done a very good job so far. Right? It's an excuse, right? It's running away from the reality to think, oh, well, aren't the activists going to take care of this? Or surely the government must understand, some people working on it and really figuring out how to sort it all out. No. No one's coming. There is no cavalry. We need huge numbers of people on board to change the whole game. And so this is where the idea of the Climate Majority Project was born. And the idea at heart is a very simple idea. It's that there already is a climate majority, by which I mean, if you look at opinion polls, there already is a majority of people who are concerned, really concerned about where we are at. What needs to happen is that majority of people who already are concerned, they need to understand that there are many, many other people just like them. So the collective awareness of there being a climate majority needs to grow. They need help in handling the difficult truth about how bad things are. They need help in handling that together. So that's about shared inner resilience building. It's about shared inner work. That's about developing the capacity to feel and express courage in relation to the desperate situation that we are moving into, including the courage to face up to the difficult feelings that arise when one hears the facts about the situation. Feelings of anger, grief, fear, shame, whatever they might be. It takes courage to allow yourself to feel those feelings and to express them and to share them. And when they are shared in whatever context, whether it's a peer group or an activist group or with a therapist or at an event like this, wherever those, and however those feelings get shared rather than being suppressed, then we're starting to get into a position where this collective awareness can grow further and where people are in a position to handle more of the truth. And then you can take people deeper into it. Because, of course, most people still don't realize just how serious the situation is. The media haven't done a good job of communicating it. Political leaders have not led on it. It's absurd and pointless to wait for them to do so. So in that context, again, all of us need to take responsibility, and this begins with things like conversations, sometimes uncomfortable conversations, to help people go deeper into the truth about the situation. So, collective awareness of the fact that we are legion, and that there are going to be more and more of us, the weather is our greatest recruiter. Handling the difficult truth together, deepening our engagement with that truth, and then fourth and finally, and most crucially of all, action. We have to actually do stuff. All right, we can't outsource the responsibility for this to anybody else, and we need to start doing it ourselves. So that, in essence, is the Climate Majority Project theory of change, and that's item 1 on my list. So coming now to item 2, what do I mean when I say you are the climate majority? Well, hopefully it's already kind of implicit in what I've said. You can't outsource this to anybody, including me and my colleagues, right? The Climate Majority Project, we are the thin end of a very large wedge. And you and millions of other people like you across this country and across the world are that wedge. We're trying to name something. We're trying to help to provide a kind of network and umbrella for something which is emerging. We're trying to support that emergence. But we can't and won't do most of it ourselves. This is about people taking leadership in the absence of governments doing what they're supposed to do, which is leading. You have to drag them kicking and screaming into a situation where they will actually start to lead. So a way of understanding what our ambition is that we want it to be the case that within about 10 years, rather than the main parties running further and further away from the question of climate and being green and so forth, they're running towards it. And they're actually trying to win votes by being more ecological than thou, rather than less. That's a way of kind of understanding what the ambition is. And what we think needs to happen in order for that to happen is there needs to be a change in our political culture, which will be led mainly from below. We need to get into a situation within, at the most, about 10 years. It may sound a long time, I'll come back to that. We need to get into a situation where politicians are feeling the pressure all the time and are feeling like, wow, if I don't get much more serious on this existential question, then my existence as a representative politician is going to come to an end. I will be voted out unless I do the right thing on this. And then, when they really feel that and fear that, then they will finally start to lead. So, you are the climate majority in the sense that it's up to people like you, people like us, all of us, together to do this and to take leadership on that. What does that look like? So, I've already said a little bit about our theory of change, but let me try to give you some examples, because for some of you this may be feeling a little bit abstract. So, well, it could mean things like Climate Action Ilkley. It seems to me that you're quite a splendid group, because you're really doing a bunch of important things. The cargo bike scheme is quite impressive. The Library of Things is very impressive, and this is just scratching at the surface. So this is an example of the kind of thing that we mean. The kind of thing we don't mean is groups that exist to do good, but don't actually succeed in doing very much. So to put that point a little more elaborately, it's not enough in the historical moment that we're in now to be a do-gooder. It's not enough to have good intentions. The atmosphere doesn't care a fig about our intentions. It only cares about how much stuff gets pumped into it. It's really important at this point in history to ask yourself honest questions, to do a bit of a kind of an audit of your life in relation to the stuff we're talking about here. Questions like, am I already undertaking serious action along with other people to try to make our situation better? Notice that I said along with other people. If we're going to get anywhere on this, it's not going to be as individuals. So if you're a vegan, that's super. So am I, pretty much. If you don't fly, that's wonderful. I don't fly. But that isn't even getting us to first base. It's about what we do together. It's about changing our systems and our institutions and our communities and our professions and our workplaces and our religious and civic associations together. It's about having an impact which has actually got enough leverage to make a huge difference. Because we all know really deep down, don't we, that however much we get more individuals doing a bit more of this individual action and a bit less of that, it's not going to be enough. The phrase I really hate is people saying, well, I do my bit. And I don't think that is anymore, right? Doing your bit, if that means something like, well, I recycle and I fly a lot less and I don't eat very much meat, that's not really, it's not the main point. The main point is doing stuff together to effect substantial change. That might be through the political system, but it might be through other points of leverage. It might be through the media. It might be through your profession, whatever that profession is. It might be in your role as an insurer, as a teacher. For many people, there are ways that they can potentially have a significant impact on the world through doing what they already do. It might be through your money. I noticed that many people in the room are of a certain age. Some of you might be thinking, what should I put into my will? Am I going to give everything to my nieces and nephews or whoever it might be? And obviously, I can't make those decisions for you. But what I would say is, now is the time to be clear that we cannot take care of our nearest and dearest by just taking care of them on an individual basis. It will not enable people to have a decent future, including the people who are closest and dearest to you, such as your children or whatever. It will not enable them to have a decent future if they simply have more money to spend on holidays or houses or whatever it might be. You cannot, at this point in history, take care of those who are dependent upon you or those who you love simply by helping them to have, in a narrow sense, a good life. Go to a good school, be brought up well, whatever. That's not sufficient. The only thing that could possibly be sufficient is if many people decide to step up much more than they ever have done before and do stuff for the collective good. At minimum, the good of the community. And in some cases, it has to go quite a lot beyond that. So I make no apology to any of you saying, any of you thinking, what shall I do with my spare £20,000 or £200,000, whatever it is, lying around? The way that the Climate Majority Project has got going in the first place is through a few such individuals deciding to give us 5-figure and 6-figure sums. We wouldn't exist without that. And a small number of people thinking very carefully and strategically about how they use their money can make a huge difference to the world. So those are some of the ways in which you can start to think about what this might actually mean. Let me give some really concrete examples. One of the first things we did as the Climate Majority Project was seek to incubate especially promising organizations in the space. So, for example, we incubated an organization called Community Climate Action. Community Climate Action, what that is based in a basically kind of conservative-ish area, so a bit like this. And it's a bunch of folk who bought some land and took ownership of a pub that was at risk of no longer being a pub. The pub is now in the community ownership. The land, they work together, they're doing rewilding, they're doing food growing, and they're reaching out quite successfully to the conservative Brexit voting local community and enrolling them in some of these activities. Another of the first organizations we incubated was called Lawyers for Net Zero, and they're now called General Counsel Sustainability Forum. So these are lawyers working in large corporations as their general counsel, who are seeking to make those corporations move in a more climate-friendly direction. They're not your stereotypical climate activists, these people, right? And that's exactly the point. We've got to step so far beyond the bubble if we're actually going to get to where we need to get. So, yes, we support this organization that works with corporate lawyers who who are starting to make a real impact in a number of companies, some of which you will have heard of. And then another example of an organisation that we've incubated would be Wildcard, which is sort of slightly more of a kind of campaigny organisation, but it does it very differently from ordinary campaigning or activist organisations. Wildcard is about rewilding, and what they've tried to do is get a public focus on the royal family, rewilding the royal estates, and they're having some real success. They've got the Crown estate to make some changes in the way that it is intending to run its land, and they've got also concrete commitments from a few of the royals, including William, to make changes on some of the land that he owns. And they're sort of feisty, fun, inclusive kind of campaigners, and we're delighted to have been their first funders. So these are just some ideas. As I say, the key point is, you are the climate majority. All that we can do is give you suggestions and help in networking and help in understanding that this is a huge collective effort, or it's nothing, a very distributed effort between entirely different people who have almost nothing in common except for their desire for there to be a decent future. And so what I would urge each of you to do is to, as I say, ask yourself this sort of audit question. Am I confident that I'm already doing the thing where I can be part of something that makes the most potential difference that I can make? And if I'm not, what is that thing? Is it something that already exists, in which case maybe I should join it? Is it something that needs to be created? Is it something, and it might be in a few cases, where you can work directly with the likes of us to make something new happen? So that's the idea of you are the climate majority. And now, the last bit of my talk, to turn to item 3, strategic adaptation. What's that all about? So, when I look at what Climate Action Ilkley does, I think it's brilliant. The thing that, if I had to comment on something which is missing, that I would say is, there's not a lot in it which is about adaptation. What is adaptation? So most of the focus around climate to date has been around what in the technical lingo is called mitigation, which means basically reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, that is absolutely crucial. Without that, we're nowhere. But as I gestured at in my initial prefatory remarks, it's increasingly clear to anyone who's paying attention that we are deep into the danger zone, and we're going to go a lot deeper into it for a long time. We're in what Churchill called the age of consequences. The possibility of being able to say, maybe we can fix this, or being able to think credibly, there will be a solution, or being able to think, well, maybe we can make ourselves completely safe and prevent dangerous climate change. These possibilities are sadly gone. They might have been credible 15, 20 years ago. They are not credible now. We are in the danger zone, and we are not going to get out of it, essentially, for the rest of our lives. I mean that for everybody in this room and everybody who you know. This is essentially a permanent crisis now. And that means that we have to take seriously adaptation. We have to take seriously adapting to the difficult situation that we are in. We have to develop preparedness. We have to build resilience, both inner resilience and outer resilience. We have to be aware that, for example, the kinds of heat waves and crazy temperatures that we've had in the last few years are only the beginning. That the kinds of wildfires that I know that you've started to have in this part of the country, that's only the beginning. They're going to get worse and worse. That the kind of flooding that we've had in this country over the past several months, for example, this is only the beginning. So what adaptation is essentially about is about facing up to that difficult part of the reality and, well, actually starting to do stuff about it. And the quicker we prepare, well, the better prepared we'll be, the safer we'll be. The name of this campaign that the Climate Majority Project is running is Strategic Adaptation for Emergency Resilience. And you might have spotted that there is a clever little acronym lurking there. There we go. Safer. what we need to become. And the way we become safer is not just by reducing greenhouse gas emissions at source, it is also by making ourselves more able to cope with the greenhouse gas emissions that are already here and the load more that are coming. So the point is, it's too late now not to take adaptation seriously, not to think seriously, for example, about how we're going to change the food that we grow. Not to think seriously, as I say, about how we're going to develop our emergency preparedness. So whether that means working out better preparedness vis-a-vis wildfires or flooding, or figuring out how we make solutions, if that's the right word, to the flooding that is going to be coming, which are more wildlife friendly and nature friendly, or whether it's about developing ways of ensuring ourselves against some of the future potential changes in our climate, by which I mean to allude to the fact that we don't know that it's going to carry on getting hotter and hotter forever. It is quite possible now that what's going to happen is that the Gulf Stream is going to be essentially switched off by the huge amount of melting that we've generated in the Arctic. It's possible that the horrible, ironic consequence of dangerous climate change within a generation or so for this country is that we might be plunged into a semi-Siberian climate. So we have to be ready for that too. So if you're thinking, for example, okay, what trees do we plant? You need to be planting trees that are suitable for hotter climates and drier climates. And you also need to be planting trees that are suitable for colder climates. That's kind of tricky. The only way you can actually do that, right, is by sort of diversifying. That's what preparedness means in this context. It means being ready for the possible bad impacts that are going to come if temperatures carry on escalating, and for the potential bad effects that are going to come if they escalate for a while and then suddenly start dipping, and we don't know which of those is going to happen. No one in the world can tell you which of those is going to happen. And we're right in the firing line here in this country, ironically. So, strategic adaptation for emergency resilience. This is a priority which has been neglected to date in the climate movement. Why has it been neglected? Well, basically, I think people were hoping that this was all going to go away, we were going to get solved, and we would never really have to adapt in a big way. Sadly, that hope is now over. But here's the good news. The good news is that when we undertake strategic adaptation, when we try to make ourselves safer, not only do we actually become safer and more robust and resilient to the shocks and impacts that are going to be coming, it's also a great way of waking people up. Right? I'm sure that many of you will be well aware when you try to spend time saying to people, yeah, there's this colorless, odorless gas, and things are going to be really awful by 2060 unless we do something to reduce our emissions of it. It can seem awfully kind of distant and abstract to people. But when you say to people something more like, I know those wildfires we've been getting, the way that the moors are getting more and more, well, there's going to be more and more of that, and we better be ready for it. That's a lot easier for a lot of people to grasp. And when they actually see people undertaking strategic adaptation, that's a great wake-up call. So we think that adaptation done in the right way is going to be hugely beneficial, including for so-called mitigation, right? Because if we actually do succeed in getting a much larger percentage of the population much more woken up, then they will also be readier to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at source. So for those people who say, well, I understand that adaptation is becoming important, but we've got to keep our focus surely on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. My answer is, you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? The best way to do it right now is to get serious about adaptation. When you get serious about adaptation, then you really land that this is real. There isn't going to be some magical solution. And people are going to have to learn how to cope with it. And then they finally start to get into a position where it's easier for them to take seriously the action that needs to be taken at all levels, including through government, including through politics. So that is what I wanted to say. I hope I have introduced the Climate Majority Project, explained to you perhaps how this is about you, and not just, as it were, me, and giving you a sense of why we think that the adaptation strand of the approach that we're trying to bring, and the suggestion to you that if you're not sure how to get involved in this multiform, multivalent project of becoming the climate majority, that if you're not sure how to do that, the best way to do it might be to engage in local community action of the kind that foregrounds adaptation. I hope that by giving you that little overview, I've helped to explain what we're about and how that's something that really makes a difference that needs to be made. Because that's the game.